All right, guys, welcome back to the CRE Spotlight. I have my friend Jason Balara of Lark Capital. We're going to switch roles. He was kind enough to interview me, so I felt like, geez, the poor guy suffered. I should let him do all the talking this time. So, Jason, why don't you tell us a little bit about yourself?
Yeah, great. And thanks for having me on, Andrew. I appreciate it. About me. So I am a multifamily syndicator. I am also a veterinary surgeon. So I sort of live in two worlds. I have been involved in real estate mainly on the construction side for probably 25 years at this point. Started in that industry when I was a teenager and kind of did that before, during, and after vet school. I've always been involved in construction in some way. I really enjoy it. And then a few years back, I guess about 2020, beginning of 2020, we have done a lot of sort of things that people talk about, like house hacking, live and flips, burrs. I've done a lot of that throughout my life. I always felt like I wanted to own and not rent. And so what that meant, because when I started, I didn't have any money. It was, buy the worst house you could possibly find and fix it up. So I have done that, and because I started that way, I have a hard time getting away from that. I don't. My wife knows we wouldn't buy a house that's already been redone. We're either going to buy one that we can fix up, or we're going to build one ourselves. That's kind of the philosophy. But effectively, we sort of ran out of our own projects to do, and then I was looking to see how I could get more involved in real estate truly as an investor. A lot of people talk about those things like house hacking and stuff as a way to start in real estate investing, and it sure is. I didn't call it that stuff when I was doing it, 20 years ago when I bought my first house. I just needed a roommate because I couldn't afford without. So it was kind of, I was doing it, I guess, before it had a name. I'm sure a lot of people were. But then come 2020, we finished up our house, and I really started to look at, what do I want to do now to be more, I guess, of an investor, like a true investor, and not just someone who did stuff with their own houses. And I started doing some digging. I live in Los Angeles, so it's hard. People sort of know it's a little bit hard to cash flow here. So buying rentals and sort of managing them was not super appealing, because I didn't know, it was going to be hard to make a cash flow. Like I said, certainly could flip houses here, and this was 2020. Probably could have made a lot of money flipping then, but at the same, well, kind of a year before I started digging in on this, we had our son, and so what I started realizing was the only way I made money at that time as a surgeon. Sure, I can make good money, but I can only make it by doing surgery. So there was nothing passive about what I did. There was nothing passive about our income. And so I wanted to figure out a way to be with family more, more than I was at the time. And flipping houses didn't fit that picture, because I I've always been a DIY guy, and I probably would continue to be that DIY guy, kind of be at the job site a lot. So it's something I would eventually love to do again with my kids, but it didn't sort of fit the picture of what I wanted to do at that time. And so I just started doing, I guess, what a lot of people do: podcasts, reading the books, kind of looking for different avenues to invest in. And I came across syndication. I came across multifamily syndication, and it really kind of checked all the boxes. It fit the picture of what I thought I wanted our investing to look like. I didn't want to be completely passive, but I wanted a way for it to be remote, or whatever you want to call it, some way to not necessarily have to be like in an OR. And so I started digging in, sort of full bore on multifamily syndication. I got a mentor. I did a mentorship with Ellie Perlman. I started that in the summer of 2020. And I started doing all the things that people do when they start, right? Reaching out to brokers, trying to figure out what markets I wanted to be in, underwriting deals, doing all the things that, you're sort of supposed to do when you start. And it took a long time. It took a long time to kind of get to the point where I got a deal under contract. That was the route I took. Ellie always told me you had either pick deals or pick capital raising, and I picked finding deals. It felt more natural to me than being a capital raiser, so that was kind of the way that I went. And it took a good 9, maybe 10 months to get the first deal under contract. In the meantime, I kind of didn't want to sit around and just be doing nothing. So we did some hard money lending with house flippers, just to start putting capital to work and be involved in the space. I got involved in a joint venture self-storage deal just through some of the networking I was doing. So the first, I guess, large scale commercial deal that I was involved in was actually a self-storage joint venture that closed in the beginning of summer 2021. And then shortly after that got the first deal under contract on the multifamily side. Closed that multifamily deal and actually a second one in December of 2021, and then closed the third multifamily deal July of 2022. Along the way, I got involved in what we were talking about it before we started recording, but I got involved in a development deal. Again, a lot of this happened. The multifamily stuff was a very, I guess, deliberate, direct. This is what I want to do. This is what I was working towards. But as I was networking with other people, other opportunities come up, right? And so one of the other mentees in the mentorship program that I was in, he was working towards this development deal. So we got to be friends and talk about it a lot. And he invited me to be a part of the deal. So I'm not the lead sponsor on that one, but yeah, it was that was all those things happened probably in the span of a year once the ball started rolling.
Oh, okay, wonderful. Jason, why don't you tell us a little bit, what advice would you give to the new person who's trying to become the GP, who's in that phase where, you're searching, you're trying to, get the relationships with the brokers, you're putting out LOIs and not winning them. How do they stay, not get discouraged is what I'm trying to get at.
I think the fact is you're going to get discouraged. That's the reality. Is it's going to be hard, but the trick is you don't give up. And I think that's where some of the mentorship programs really come in, and also just the networking and talking to other people in the space, because like I have never talked to a person in multifamily that was like decided they were going to do multifamily and 2 weeks later were involved in a multifamily deal. Like it's always months, it's sometimes years. Like it always takes a long time. And you can even look at it from the perspective of the people that have been doing it for a long time, the big names in the space. They're not closing deals every month. They're closing maybe a few deals a year. And so if you're doing it right, you're truly being conservative, and you're sort of really going after deals that fit in your specific buy box, you shouldn't be closing deals frequently. You should be really dialing in and doing, sort of going after those deals that are specifically what you want. And so it's about being patient. It's about realizing that when you do get that deal and you eventually close on a multifamily deal, it's not, you didn't just close on one unit or a duplex. You just all at once have 50, 100, 200, 300, whatever it is. You have a large unit count. Not necessarily that unit count is like the measure that people should be looking at, but if you look at it in comparison to being on the residential side, I think one of the things that's appealing on the residential side is it's a lot easier to do deals quicker, right? And do more of them. So it's like frequent wins. Whereas I think with multifamily and syndication, you really have to like the process. You have to be really kind of married to the process, both on the acquisition side and also on asset management, because even if it takes you a year to close the deal, well, guess what? You're going to have that deal for a number of years. So once you close it, the work's kind of just starting.
Oh, okay. And then one thing we wanted to know is, when you from LA to pick a different market to kind of be specialized in, how did you pick Atlanta?
I think it just had to do with, I guess, competitive advantage, right? When you're looking for markets, I think there's two things that are important. One, most people want to invest in a landlord friendly state or a landlord friendly market, county, whatever it is. You want to look at it from a population growth standpoint. So there are sort of those common metrics, but then you really want to look at it as, is there something that makes this location more advantageous to me, right? And for me, that was one, my mentor invested a lot around Atlanta. So I had connections
Oh,
sort of via her to property management, to brokers, that sort of thing. So she could have some of those introductions and help me with that. The other thing is it just so happened that I had a friend who had moved from LA to Atlanta, got her residential real estate license. And so she was involved in that, at least in that space to some degree. So to me, that made me feel like, okay, I have someone who is, sort of boots on the ground. One of the mistakes I think I made in the beginning was I initially looked at like every market, right? Any deal. I signed up for every single email list. I looked at every single deal. I think it helped me get better underwriting, but it was like, I'm looking at Atlanta, the Carolinas, Florida, Texas, like every single, Oklahoma, like really pretty much anything that would come across. And what I realized was I think I spread myself too thin. And I think that's part of the reason why I didn't get any deals for as long as I did, because it was like, I didn't have a team in all those different places. I didn't have the relationships in all those different places. So, as a new syndicator, if you're just cold calling a broker about their deal that you got from the email list, they don't really, especially then the market was so hot. Like now you probably can talk to some brokers because they're looking for people to do deals, but it was a different market then. And you needed to have repetition and sort of, go there, be in front of them, that kind of thing to establish. So I decided, okay, I'm just going to really focus on Atlanta until I feel like it is completely dialed in, both from a property management standpoint, boots on the ground. Like there's plenty of opportunity there. So I don't feel that I'm missing out by not being in other markets until I know that I can almost put Atlanta on autopilot and then just repeat that process in another market.
how often do you fly out to Atlanta, Jason?
At least once a month. Some months more. Kind of depends on what's going on in the projects. We've been doing value add deals. We've had some pretty aggressive business plans and renovation schedules. And like I said, construction's my forte. That's my background. So go in there, making sure things are happening the way we want to, talking to contractors. Of course, we have third party management, but still it's something that I know well, and I can sort of talk the talk, and making those relationships directly with the contractors, I think is actually very helpful.
Mm. What is your buy box? Why don't we help the audience understand specifically what's the Jason Balara buy box?
Well, it's changed. I'll tell you that. So when I started out, it was, B and C class deals, value add, uh, 70 maybe to 150 units. That was kind of where I was looking. My deals in Atlanta are all C class deals. They're between 70 and 90 units. And so what I've realized is a couple things. One, in theory, and maybe this was true, 5-10 years ago, in theory, C class deals used to be looked at as the ones where you can achieve the higher returns. However, the delta between the cap rates on a C class deal and a B class deal and an A class deal, it's not really that big anymore. And so the returns that you're going to get on a C class or a B class or A class aren't quite as different as they used to be. And so that's one reason why my buy box has changed. The other reason is it's there's just a lot of things that can go wrong with older buildings, like older houses, right? So it's just, you run into plumbing issues, you run into electrical, the roofs might be older. It's just, although the returns might be slightly higher, it's probably more headache, I guess, and more things to manage. And so where my buy box is now is B class. I still very much like the idea of value add. Like I said, construction is my kind of superpower, I guess, or construction management. But B class and definitely larger than 100 units, because that's the other thing is the bigger you get, the better efficiency of scale you're going to get. So like if you're doing a renovation on 50, 70 units or something like that, your pricing for materials, it's going to be harder to really look at that from a volume standpoint. But if you're talking about a 300 unit property and you're buying flooring in bulk, or you're buying cabinets in bulk or appliances in bulk, that's when people can get some really big savings. You can spend a little bit of money to rent some storage space and put all your materials for your contractors, like purchase them in bulk ahead of time. That does a couple things. It increases your purchasing power, but it also increases your efficiency because it's all right there, right? So you're not like, oh, this one's on back order, supply chain issues, all the stuff that everybody hears about. It's not, you don't have those problems anymore when you've already got it kind of sitting there waiting.
Well, one thing I wanted to ask you, people have different opinions on it. The things we want to do to add additional revenue streams, whether it's storage lockers or reserve parking, or Wi-Fi or security systems. What is your view on it? Is it something that's part of the underwriting that makes or breaks the deal penciling, or do you view it as like an upside kicker where the deal has to succeed on its merits, and then these other things are like nice if we get them, but the meat of it should be the rent. What is your take on it?
Yeah, I would say the latter. I think, and also, frankly, it depends on the class of the deal, right? It depends on the again, that back to that A, B, C class. It depends on the tenant base. Like a C class property is not going to support, the tenants aren't going to want, they're not going to want to pay extra to have Amazon lockers or reserved parking. It's just those people, they're typically, those tenants, their finances might be a little bit tighter. They're really just, you're just wanting them to pay the rent. If you're looking at a B plus A class deal, that's when you start to think about adding in those other things and increasing those streams of revenue. Now, certainly you want to look at what the current management, the current ownership groups, when you're buying a property, you want to look at what they're getting for that sort of other fee income, what those line items are. Like, are they capturing utility reimbursements? And if they're not, is that something that the comps are doing? So there are certain things in there that yes, you should have a good idea as to whether or not they can be captured, and if so, you should. But I do think in general, most of that sort of other income stuff is kind of gravy on top of what I'm really looking at, which is the in-place rents, what we can get those rents to with and without renovation, and what can we do on the expense side potentially to lower those expenses.
What are some of the expense items? Like, I mean, I know everyone knows the typical water and electricity type of savings. What
Yeah.
are some of the expense items that LPs might not be as familiar with?
Yeah, and I think that the utility savings one is an important one to mention, specifically water savings. There are companies that you can hire that will literally go in and put all new toilets, all new shower fixtures, everything, so to cut down on the water use. And in some properties, that is a tremendous savings. Some properties have just all the old plumbing fixtures and they're leaking, the toilets are running. Like, sometimes it is actually a tremendous savings. So I know people are aware of it, but it's actually probably where you can get the biggest bang for your buck in terms of making a difference, if that's one of the problems with coming from prior to your purchase. Beyond that, I think there's a couple of expenses that the key ones, or the key one that's probably most important in terms of what's going to make the biggest dent in your NOI is the taxes. And so something that I think maybe people aren't necessarily aware of, a couple of things. One, you need to know, and it's different in every county, you need to know when and how those taxes should be expected to assess, right? So in some counties, they only reassess the value every 3 years. And so potentially that tax value is already locked in if they assessed it the year before you bought it, and it's very unlikely to be reassessed for several years afterwards. Or maybe it's at the end of those 3 years, and the amount that the seller is telling you they're paying for taxes, as soon as you buy it, that might double. So those are things that you have to be aware of. You may not necessarily be able to specifically cut that expense, but you have to know what it is. And there are some tricks. There are tax advisory firms that will contest those tax assessments for you and can get them down. And usually you can get them down to some degree. There's another trick that I've literally only heard 2 people ever talk about, but there's something called a pre-purchase appraisal. And so you can go in there, and there are companies that will, you might liken it to a cost seg analysis, in that they separate out the cost of the land versus the cost of the building, only specific to the cost of the building. And so, sorry, to the cost of the land. And so the cost of the building is separated out. So when you do one of these pre-purchase appraisal, when you do that process, what happens is you get the value recorded based on that pre-purchase appraisal. Now, what that does is it sort of keeps the county knowing for how much you bought it for. So there are it's a complicated process. It's not cheap, but overall it can save you quite a bit on the taxes at the end of the day. So it's a chunk of money to put up front, but it may end up saving you like potentially hundreds of thousands, depending on what your tax bill might be in the long run. So that's a trick that I don't hear a lot of people talk about, but it is an available service. So if you expect that you're going to have a big jump in your taxes in the time of your ownership, it's really something to investigate. Otherwise, I mean, you look at what they have. You look at the payroll expenses. You look at what's being spent on marketing. Some of the things that we maybe a couple of years ago would underwrite at sort of a certain amount of value per unit. Some of that stuff has gone up. Certainly payroll has gone up, payroll expenses on a per unit basis. For the most part, if you're going to do the marketing right, the marketing expenses have gone up. Apartments.com raised their prices a bunch this fall. So that's something that's probably the most common market strategy that people use. And they have different levels, but everybody's like, oh yeah, you have to get the top level if you want to have any success with it. And the prices have gone up quite a bit. So the underwriting has changed in certain places in terms of what you're gonna expect. So you just have to kind of know what that is for your market and how to manipulate it such that you can save as best as possible.
For your market, how predictable is insurance? Because like in Florida or like Texas or some other markets, it's proven to be very hard to underwrite for insurance because the increases can be rather big. I'm not familiar with Atlanta necessarily enough to assume on that question.
It's an interesting, and I take this with a grain of salt because I don't have any deals in Florida or Texas. Everybody keeps talking about the taxes there or the insurance there and everything like that. I think that you can almost always find out what it's going to be before you purchase it. Mm-hmm. Where you might get surprised, I guess, would be on the renewals. I think a couple of years ago, people were almost not believing where the prices of insurance were going, they were, oh, it should be 300 a unit and it was 500 a unit. That's just not the reality anymore. Like, no, there is no insurance for 300 a unit. That just, it's not like, I think sometimes it comes down to investors realizing just as this is where we are now. And so I don't know that it's so much unpredictable, because you can certainly, if you have a good insurance broker, just reach out ahead of time and say, what do you expect the insurance premiums to be on this particular deal? And they should be able to tell you pretty close. So I think if you're dialed in on the market that you're investing in, it shouldn't be that much of a surprise. I think maybe in Florida and Texas, because of the recent sort of storm issues and freeze in Texas and hurricanes, some of that stuff has jumped up on renewals. But I don't think on a new purchase you should ever really be surprised, because you should have an insurance broker you can ask about.
I mean, some of your deals could go 5-10 years, so you're going to be dealing with some renewals over that time period.
Right. Yeah, it renews every year. So we just had a renewal. It went up a little bit. It wasn't crazy. It wasn't like shockingly high. It went up a little bit. I don't know the exact percentage off the top of my head, but they renew every year. You can look at umbrella policies for multiple properties. I mean, there are ways to get those costs down a little bit sometimes. Also, again, it depends on the vintage. So that's one of the reasons why I'm steering away from C-class going forward, is it's harder to find insurance on. There's less options on like a C-class deal than you would on the newer deals. So it's those little nuances make it a little bit more challenging in that space.
Oh, okay. What is your view of multifamily going forward? Now, a lot has changed. So, are you viewing anything differently, or is it pretty much maintain the Jason Balara model, just maybe moving up from C to B?
Yeah, certainly for my sort of buy box, my what I'm looking for in deals, that hasn't really changed. I think, or sorry, it has changed from that sort of C class to B class, but it hasn't changed so much how I would underwrite things. Like, people really worry about the interest rates, but the interest rate is just one metric in your underwriting model. So yes, that's higher, which means other things have to sort of be lower to make it all work out the way it should in terms of the overall investor returns. And it's going to happen a couple ways. One, maybe the prices have to come down. Two, maybe our expectations of returns for investors have to come down a little bit. So that I'm seeing, again, like, I look to my mentors, I look to the people that have been doing this for a long time, and I look at their offerings and I see, okay, like, these IRRs and these cash on cash projections are lower than they were 2 years ago, sometimes by 2, 3, 4%. That's still better than most other investment options that people have. So it's just, I think it's a matter of the market resetting itself in all capacities, not just at the interest rate. Likely the interest rates will come back down. They may not go back down to where they were, but interest rates go up and down. That's how market cycles work. They went up super fast this time, which is what sort of panicked everybody, but they go up and down. So it's something that you have to try and be aware of what's going on right now. People got trapped kind of over this summer and fall, myself being one of them. I had a deal fall out of contract because of interest rates shot up so fast while we had it under contract that it just no longer worked. There was no way that we could do the deal at where the interest rates went to, and seller wasn't willing to reduce price. So I know I'm not the only one that happened to, kind of in that time frame, but now things are starting to level out. You can look at deals from a okay, if my interest rate's going to be 8, like that's how I have to underwrite it. The market is settling down. It's not lower, but it's settling down, and there's not that same level of, sort of panic and uncertainty on the lending front.
What are your thoughts on rate caps?
Most of the time they're required, so you don't really get to have a thought. You get told you will have a rate cap on this deal. I think that you want, at this point right now in the market, I want fixed rate debt. I would want to stay away from floating rate. And to be honest, because the rate caps have gotten so expensive and things went so crazy, there's not a lot of floating rate, at least what I'm seeing, there's not a lot of it even being offered. So it's kind of, at least on the bridge debt side. So what a lot of people are doing is they're offering fixed rate debt, but it's just a higher interest rate. But if you do get into floating rate, you're going to have a rate cap. They're not going to let you not have one. So I think they probably right now have saved a lot of people that got floating rate debt in beginning of 2022 earlier. If you had a rate cap in place, it's going to save you from being just hemorrhaging money, because it's going to stop it at some point. So the rate caps used to be really inexpensive and almost a formality.
Well, actually, I know
over, sort of, I guess, starting.
I actually know of some deals that they didn't buy the rate cap, and they're hemorrhaging. So
We didn't get an option. We have a floating rate loan on one of our deals. We didn't get an option. We had to buy a rate cap. And frankly, right now, I'm really happy we did, because we are probably, we'll see what happens with rates, but we may actually make money on the rate cap because the rates went up so quickly. And when we closed, we essentially hit our cap 2 months after we closed. And so that rate cap for people who don't know, it's basically an insurance policy. So the holders of those rate cap policies, now they send my lender the difference every month. So right now we have a fixed rate debt because it's capped at a certain point, and whatever it goes above that, that rate cap vendor pays it. So if it comes down again, below where our cap is, then our debt service will go down. But ultimately right now it's acting as if we got a rate cap at, just a higher rate, or sorry, a fixed rate at a higher rate.
You're a pretty conservative guy, Jason. You like to do things the right way and mitigate risk. And I can tell, we've talked off the record quite a bit. I know personally just how, I don't know, say they were zealous, but you're quite concerned about your investors and taking care of them, and you really value your reputation and the relationships, and you take being a steward of other people's life savings pretty seriously as a person. How do you balance that with losing deals to other people where you find out what the purchase price is and you're thinking, how on earth did they underwrite this? How do you balance sometimes losing deals by being conservative?
I will say maybe in the very beginning that bothered me, like when it was going through whatever it was, 9 or 10 months and not getting deals. I think that's where mentors can be really, really helpful, because they're also not winning deals, right? Like the people that I want to model my business after are also making offers and losing out. And for a while, like, everybody wanted to be a syndicator. Like it was just like, it was, when the market was hot, everybody wanted it. A lot of people since then are really quiet. So I see this as, sure, there's going to be some opportunity. I think I hope that a lot of people don't get, in big trouble and get taken advantage of. But I think what's more important about times like right now is just learning from it. So I guess to answer your question, I think it's sort of in a roundabout way.
No.
it
a tough,
bothered me a little bit at first, but what's that?
well, it's a tough question. I mean, it's not an easy answer.
Yeah, it was, I mean, like I said, bothered me a little bit in the beginning, but frankly now, and a lot of this probably for me has to do with the fact that I did have that deal fall out of contract. I lost a lot of money, but it was my money. It was not investor money. And it hurt. It
Yeah.
was, it was not a fun thing to talk about with my wife. It was not it was a hard time. However, it would be worse to me if I lost investor money. And so the that makes losing out on deals because someone, you know, overbid. Okay.
Okay.
I wish them all the best. Like I don't I hope everyone succeeds. I don't really, it's not really a competition. I think I want other people to succeed. It inspires me to see people doing well. So I don't, I guess it maybe bothered me in the beginning because I wanted to do deals, but really at this point, okay, that's fine. I'm going to stick to my principles and make sure that if, the next deal I do, it's going to be as near as a guaranteed win as I can be in investing.
That's wonderful. I love that you take the investor's position very seriously, and you have more of a long-term view on it. You're not planning on how quick can I do 5 deals and retire kind of thing. You know,
Yeah.
your view is a lot longer term than that.
Yeah.
Um, why don't we touch one subject that's it's I don't want to say it's controversial, but a lot of people out there have hot takes one way or the other. And in my mind, it's more of a nuanced position. There's really no right answer to it. What is your opinion on recapitalizations or recaps? From the LP perspective, is it something to be scared of? Is it something to be positive about? Or is it, the proverbial it depends?
I think in reality it is that it depends. I think it it depends on the situation, right? So if you had, I'm just trying to think of an example, right? So if you have a, we'll go back to that sort of floating rate type of example, and you've had now your um, debt service payment is substantially higher than what you thought it was going to be. It may be beneficial to, there's a couple of ways to approach it, right? You can do a capital call. You could raise more money to fill that gap. You can pause distributions. There's a number of ways to approach it, but I think you have to be fiscally responsible. And pausing distributions or doing a capital call doesn't mean fiscally irresponsible, that you necessarily mismanaged it. It could, like, in reality, it could be that you didn't do what you should have done, or you made mistakes. But it to me, it's all about communication. Whatever, if that's happening, whatever the reason is behind it, and it's you just need to clearly communicate that. And the reality is, if you are doing a capital call, or you're doing, raising, whatever, however you want to refer to it, the overall amount in the deal, unless it's a huge difference than what you initially projected, it's not going to change returns very much, and it may just save the project. So that, sort of dilution effect that people talk about, like if you actually sit down and put it into the underwriting and you say, oh, I need 500,000 more on this deal to weather this storm, it is not going to change the IRR for the investors, but a 0.5%. Like, it's not going to be a difference between it. It may mean you don't get a distribution for a little while, but in the end, like, when people pause distributions, it's because we're trying to manage this current situation. You're still, it's not because, oh, we're not going to give the investors their money back. So I don't know if that answers the question.
What does, I
Andrew,
mean, there's two types. I mean, there's recaps from trouble, and there's recaps of the GP put in, more money than they wanted to, deals in progress. Now
right.
you have the opportunity to come in and I've had to tell investors, they say, well, why would I want to come in? I'm like, well, you're coming in on a de-risk position. You're coming further into a deal. A lot of the unknown is taken away. And if they're already ahead of pro formas or they're on the right trajectory, and you're kind of getting in when the getting's good, and you didn't have money sitting and then be told, oh, well, the deal's not going through. Here's your capital back. Sorry, it's been 3, 4 months.
Yeah.
If you've already broken, like, we're talking about a specific thing off the record.
Yeah.
You're kind
Yeah.
of walking in on a going concern. Your equity has been significantly de-risked. So
Yeah.
that's
And
kind of where, that's where I was going, the two sides of it. Like you say, it all depends. Um, the investors you deal with, are you a 506C or a 506B person, Jason?
we've done both. We've done
Oh,
both.
okay. Just always
I
careful. I don't want to ask you about a 506B deal and we get in trouble,
yeah, no, we've done both. I I come from I don't come from money. So a lot of my, close network, family, friends aren't accredited. So I like the idea of 506B raises so that I can have them involved if they want to be. I want to be able to offer them. Uh, I, I'll stay off the soapbox, but I actually think some of the rules about accredited and unaccredited investors and things like that are detrimental more than they help. So I just think that it's for me, like rich people don't need my help getting richer. Like they know what to do. The people that don't, that may not have, their finances in order, and they're looking for a way to get better at that, they do need our help. And so it's kind of, to me, it's almost like you're just that the SEC regulations on syndications make it so rich people can get richer easily and that the not rich people still have a hard time finding ways to make smart investments. So it's frustrating. I don't like that it's the way that it is sort of defined, but so I do both. I guess that's a long answer to the
No, no.
to the question.
How do you define, I hate when they put in these murky words. How do you personally define a substantive relationship? If somebody watches this podcast and like, okay, I like Jason. And guys, this is not investment advice. I'm not pitching Jason, but it's a
Yeah.
legitimate question.
We're not SEC attorneys.
Yeah, I'm not a salesman. Like, I'm not. Jason's not compensating me or anything. But if someone just was like, "Hey, I really like Jason," I get DMs like this. Like, they're like, "Hey, I really love your guest, but it's a 506B guy. Like, how many times do I got to meet Jason, or like, how many phone calls, or like, for how what does substantive mean?" And I don't actually know how to answer that question. So I was like, let's just ask Jason. It'd be a fun question to ask.
Yeah. I don't want to go to jail. So for me, it has meant that I knew the person. Like I knew the person already, and it wasn't like, oh, I had a number of emails with them or a certain number of phone calls. I think that's probably why I think a lot of people end up going sort of strictly 506C at some point, because you can market it, you can talk to people like one time and they can come into your deal. They can be a friend of a friend of a friend. They can be a friend of someone who invested with you before. But having said that, like I don't see myself ever going to 506C only. I think it'll just depend on the deal. If I think that we can raise it with sort of the closer network, the inner circle, then I would do that. I would prefer to be able to have it available to those people. And the other thing, I've toyed with the idea of, if you get a Reg A fund, and again, I'm not an SEC attorney, but there are ways to actually be able to market and raise from unaccredited investors. There are ways around it, but it essentially takes a lot of money and a lot of time to be able to be that person. So it's something that I would consider in the future.
Oh, okay, in the future. Yeah, it's just like,
Yeah.
taking on, like, let's say, just make up amount, but you start taking five or $10,000 investors, the admin cost of doing that is like, you're having to weigh the pros and cons of
Yeah.
how many investors you would have to take on, and the admin of sending out hundreds of K1s versus, maybe dozens of K1s. It
Yeah.
just becomes a trade-off. So I know people that do reggae, and it's kind of like a love-hate relationship
Right.
for
Right.
them.
Yeah. I mean, there's reggae, there's like the crowdfunding sites. Like there are there are apps and websites and stuff where people could get on and put $500 into a real estate deal. I think, and this is not like to discourage people from investing, but I think if you only have $500 or even $1,000 that you want to invest, there's probably better ways to do it, to move yourself to the point of being able to not necessarily be accredited, but get into some of these deals and be investing amounts that actually will move the needle in your life eventually. Because if you invest, $1,000 and say it's an 8 pref, right?
Yeah.
Like you're getting $80 a year off of that, right? So it's like that's probably not going to change your life. It's not that it's a bad idea to invest it, but it's just kind of you might be better off educating yourself, looking towards ways to make more money, that kind of thing, so that you can increase what you're getting invested.
Okay. We'll ask the token question. It's always fun. And feel free to elaborate as little or as long as you want.
Sure.
What are the books that Jason Balara reads, in his spare time to stay up on the industry and or find motivation or skills in life?
I would say so. When I started, it was reading, kind of the nuts and bolts books. I will say, what started me sort of down this road at all was David Green's book on long distance investing, which has nothing to do with multifamily, but it's what sparked the idea of me investing like somewhere other than in my neighborhood. Um, so I read a lot, like Joe Fairless's best ever book on multifamily syndicate is like literally like the instruction manual. It really, you kind of could just sit down and read that and do exactly what's in there and probably be okay. You won't, you won't have the input of mentorship and things like that, but like as far as how to do it, it's all available to you. It's available in books, it's available online pretty much for free. um, at this point, what I like to read are books on more like self-development and business management type things. I would say probably one of my favorites of 2022 was Who Not How.
Mm.
Um, as I said, I'm really a DIY guy. Like, this is a silly example, but we need to replace a faucet in our house, and my wife's like, "Why don't you have the plumber do it?" I'm like, "But I can just go to Home Depot," and like I like going to Home Depot. It's just, but it's just like it's not the best use of my time, and I know that, but sometimes I just like doing projects. So I think, but what Who Not How does and talks about is, for people who haven't read it, the title tells you what the book's about, but it's not even so much like, oh, I don't know what this book is going to be about, because you get it in the title, but like the examples that are in it, how they use it in their lives, how it sparked ideas for me to use it in my life. Like there's just a lot of stuff in there that at least for me, I wouldn't have thought, oh, I can have someone do that. And I didn't probably put enough like value on my time, and I thought about things backwards. It was like, why would I always was thinking this, I mean, my whole life, like, well, if I can do that, why would I pay someone else to do it? Right. And that's the DIY mindset. And to a point, that served me very, very well when I was young and didn't have any money, and I renovated houses and figured it out. Like, that was very helpful and made me money. But now my time is better used not doing that. It's better used being a CEO of a real estate company. It's better being a surgeon. Like, it's better being a dad and a husband. Like, there's
Mhm.
much better use of my time than installing a sink, even though I might still install the faucet. I might
This is fun.
it's
I
just,
get it.
yeah, because it's fun. I'll let my son, my kids can sit there and watch me do it, and they'll get a kick out of it. So like, if I can make it an activity that happens with my family, I'll do that stuff. Like, then it's fine. I think those are valuable skills to have for people in general, being able to use some tools or fix something in your house if it goes wrong. But ultimately, that book has changed a lot for me, and I'm still, it's a hard habit for me to kick in terms of just getting away from that DIY mentality, but it makes me think about it. It makes me think now, almost every activity, it's like, should I be doing this? Like, should I be the one physically doing this, whatever specific task, or is this a thing I should have someone else doing? And that's, that's a very much a learning process for me.
Oh, wow. That's really insightful. What are your thoughts on virtual assistants, VAs?
I guess I have one because she lives in Atlanta. But I don't look, I don't want to say that I look down upon VAs. I don't, but she is someone I already knew. Like, to me, she's my executive assistant, and ultimately will be the COO of my company. Like, that's how I view her. For VAs, we're actually been talking about sort of potentially implementing some VAs to do some of the repetitive stuff that she does for me, or I do it myself now. Like, there are a lot of things that go into, like, I mean, like having a podcast. There's like just simple things like guest outreach, the podcast editing, the posting it on social media, like all of that stuff. That stuff takes time. And
Oh yeah.
I would not have a podcast if I didn't have a podcast editor. That's the first, probably, I guess, in reality, that's the first person I hired or whatever, was a podcast editor for this business, because I sort of got, I got encouragement, you should start a podcast, that kind of thing. I was very nervous about it, but if I didn't have a really great podcast editor, and he's also like a digital marketer, so it's like, he helped me with strategy, he's helped me with so much, and even just the confidence to do it. So for us, I do think we will take on some VAs, probably not long, like over these next couple months, to start having them take over some of the other tasks. And what I always look for, whether it's a VA or a in-person employee, like, to me, is, let me find someone who shares the same values we have. They want to be in the culture that I want in this business, and they can learn. I don't mind, like, learning on the job if it's someone that, sort of like my executive assistant. She was not in multifamily, like, but I had worked with her before, and I knew how good she was, and I just said, look, this is someone I want on my team, and we'll figure the rest out. And we have, and she's phenomenal, and I'm very happy. So it's yeah, I think VAs will be, and quite frankly, she's going to be in charge of the VAs. Like, I'm going to say, tell me what you want off your plate, and let's write an SOP. There's apps like the what's it called, Loom. I think you make little videos, like, you essentially teach them what to do, and then let them do it. And she can take a lot of what she does now and implement that in a single VA or multiple VAs, or however it works out.
That's a pretty big step for a guy that's a do-it-yourselfer, huh?
Yeah. Well, you see, I have to, like, this is why I invest long distance, right? Because if I was investing in multifamily here, I'd probably be there all the time, right? It's like, we've talked about moving to Atlanta, and I was like, I think that would probably actually be a bad idea.
Bad idea.
It would be hard for me to not be, like, when you're renovating units, like, this is taking too long, I'll just go do it, that kind of thing. Like, even when I go in town, it's like, I end up sometimes doing some of that stuff, and it's just, in a way, I enjoy it. I enjoy that type of work. I enjoy the hands-on stuff. I like swinging a hammer, but again, it's just being smart about what the best use of my time is.
Hey, Jason, what we will never forget, the most important part is, how do people get a hold of you?
Yeah. The email is probably the best way. It's jason@larkcapital.com. As far as social media, I'm probably most active on Instagram, and it's at Lark Capital, but also on LinkedIn, and Jason Balara on LinkedIn. But yeah, an email, I'll get back to you quickly.
What is the name of your podcast? Remind me again.
Know your why?
Know your why. That's right. And you're on episode a lot. Remind the viewers, what are you up to?
Yeah, I think 185 came
My
out today, 186, something like that. But we're actually, I'm really excited about this. I'm not gonna spill what it's gonna be, but we are recording episode 200 tomorrow, and it's something very special to me. So, that's all I'm gonna say, because I'm really excited for that episode. I'm excited just to record it, but I'll be really excited. That to me, I've done something a little bit, sort of special at 50 and 100, and so now do another thing that's special for 200.
Well, thank you so much, Jason. And I quite like you a lot. I actually do
Thank
regularly
you.
comment or like on your videos. I do listen to them, and I love your interview style. I'm very envious. You're very smooth. I'm still learning to do this. I'm not in episode 200 yet. I got a long
Yeah.
way to go.
Well, don't
Thank
go
you
back
so
and listen
much.
to episode 1. It's the first probably 50. It was there was a lot of fumbling, and I certainly still don't feel smooth. But
I,
thank
I
you.
think I think you're pretty smooth. Because I'm in the first 30 phase. So I'm still learning as I go. Thanks again,
Again,
Jason. I really appreciate it,
yeah.
man.
Thank you, Andrew. Thank you for having me.